Hey guys, so welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Amanya. I'm 24 years old. I'm a Sri Lankan girl currently working as a junior doctor in Sydney, Australia. If you do like this video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. So let's just get on to the video. So this video is actually a continuation, more like a part 2 of my first video, which was my medical school journey, which was about me studying medicine for my first 2.5 years in Malaysia. So if you haven't watched that video, I do recommend that you do. I've attached the link in my bio down there, which you can click on and watch that first and then come back to this video. So this one is mainly about my journey in Western Sydney, Australia, which is where I did the second part of my degree, which was my 3rd, 4th and 5th year. So just a little bit of recap from my Malaysia video. I talked about how my first 2 years were mainly about theory, and I talked about the matching process and how we select universities and how the universities select us. And I also talked about how Western Sydney, Australia was my first choice because I wanted to come to Australia because that was a personal preference, and I personally like the whole idea of living in Australia, and if I wanted to settle down here, I like the idea of working in Australia because the healthcare system seemed really good, and I like the climate in Australia, and it was just overall the most suitable place for me to live in, which is why I picked Australia and I picked Western Sydney, because Western Sydney was one of the universities in Sydney. That was also Newcastle, but it's a bit further away from like Sydney CBD, so I stuck to Western Sydney, and that's how I ended up there. So once you get a position in Western Sydney, Australia, which is again what happened to me, you kind of have to do the whole visa process and everything on your own because IMU doesn't usually do that for you. So I started in Western Sydney in January 2019. So I finished IMU in December 2018. So I didn't have a lot of time to sort out everything, but somehow me and my family, we managed to sort it out. So I had to do the visa application process and everything on my own when I came back to Sri Lanka, and that was not too complicated. I managed to get my student visa in about 2 days because I think at the time there was no COVID, there was no delays and all of that. So I did have a bit of an idea about what Western Sydney, Australia was gonna be like, but I didn't know anyone like too well, because it was like we come in the middle of the whole degree, because degree is 5 years long because it's an undergraduate one. So the first 2 years were theory years, the next 3 years, which is our 3rd, 4th and 5th year, are more clinical years. So that's the time I transferred to Western Sydney. So it is a bit, like overwhelming. You kind of come in the middle of the degree, you don't know people, everyone has already made their friends, everyone knows everybody, and you're kind of like coming in the middle like, I don't know any of these people, I don't know what I'm doing. But luckily I did have 5 other IME students transfer with me to Malaysia, so we kind of stuck together during the first few days trying to figure things out on our own. So it was not too bad, but yeah, it was actually overall fine, and throughout the next 2 years I made lots of friends, and I'm still working with some of them now, so it all worked out at the end of the day. So how the 3rd year works is from 3rd year onwards, it's mainly clinical skills and clinical years is what we call it, which means that 90% of your time you're in a hospital. So you're learning while you're in hospital instead of sitting down in a lecture theatre and learning the lectures, which is what we do in our first 2 years. So this is more like a in-person learning kind of experience where you do a couple of terms in hospital. So for my 3rd year, I had gastroenterology. Oh my god, I messed that up. I had gastro, I had cardio, I had breast endocrine surgery, I had some community terms and a bunch of things like that. So which means that when we have that particular term, so when I did gastro, we saw gastro patients because the ward is full of gastro patients, and then we learn while we are on the term with those doctors. We also have about 4 weeks of lectures spread out through the year, and that's when we would learn other things. So even though I said I had gastro, cardio, those terms, there were obviously other things that I hadn't learned. So we would learn those stuff during the lecture times. And other than that, we also had OSCEs at the end of the year. I've talked about OSCEs multiple times in the previous video, but just a quick summary, it's a clinical exam where you have a patient, a person pretending to be a patient, actually kind of like an actor, and then you have a case, and then you take a history or do an examination on the patient, and an examiner will look at you and observe you and mark you. So that's how that worked. And we had a theory and an OSCE exam at the end of the year, and I think majority of the people passed that because our third year is supposed to be the most chill year out of the year. So it was a pretty good year and I really enjoyed it as well, and it was pretty cool, like going to a hospital and actually seeing patients. Because when I was in Malaysia, even though we did go into hospital like a few times during the 2 years, and also we had a 1 month long posting while I was in Malaysia in a rural hospital, I didn't get that opportunity to really interact with patients because for me the language barrier was always an issue, so I didn't really get the chance to interact with patients that much. So actually talking to patients, being able to get a proper history out of them really made a big difference. And that's when I realized, okay, coming to Australia was a really, really good choice and option for me, because I actually learned so much just talking to the patients and being able to actually interact with them. So the next year was the 4th year, and that's supposed to be one of the more tougher years. I'm sorry there are like bird noises around because again I'm back home in Sri Lanka, if I didn't mention that before. That's why I got late posting this video, because I came here on my annual leave and I haven't had the time, because when you're back home on holiday you just have so much stuff to do. Anyways, getting back to what I was saying, so the 4th year is a bit more of a busy year. We have some specialty terms that were, sorry, I'm like messing up my words, but we have some specialty terms, which is what we call it. So it's obs and gynae, pediatrics, mental health, and oncology. So they are pretty, and community research. So we do a research term as well. After each of them, we'd have an exam, like a written one and an OSCE. And I really enjoyed my pediatrics and my obs and gynae terms. That's when I was like, oh my god, I could be a pediatrician, I could be a gynecologist, but that's a topic for a whole other discussion. Again, 90% of our time we were in hospital, and we'd had an exam at the end of each term, and we had to pass them. If not, we had to repeat them. And then we moved on to our 5th and final year. So 5th year was pretty much the same. Again, 90% of hospital time and lectures in the middle, like a few weeks of lectures spread apart. But 5th year was always like, oh my god, this is our final year, we have our final exams, we need to know everything from year 1 to 5 now, and we have our OSCEs. So it was crazy stressful, and we had to go to hospital as well. We'd usually try to come back early, and the doctors in the hospital would let us because they know that we are sitting our final exams. So it was they were quite nice enough, most of them were quite nice enough to be like, you know what, go home and study, because we had a lot of content, like 5 years worth of content to remember within a few months and sit these exams. So again, we had, so in the middle of the year, which was in May, we had our theory exams, and towards the end of the year, which is like in October, November, was when we were supposed to have our OSCEs. However, this was the year that COVID struck. So everything got a bit, messy, but our terms were not really cancelled. We still had to go to hospital. We had to wear our masks and everything, but we still had to go into hospital placement. So nothing was cancelled. It was not like anything really changed for us. We were still going to hospital, still seeing patients, just being more careful and wearing a mask. So it was still fine. I was able to I had some really good terms like general medicine, and we had an ED term and things like that. So we had our final exams, and luckily, thankfully, we passed. And then we got on to the second half of the year. The second half of the year was when they introduced a thing called AIMS, which is called Assistant in Medicine. So this is something we didn't have previously, because it was something brought up by the government because of COVID. So what we would do is we'd actually work in hospitals, we'd work in COVID vaccination centers, we'd actually work full hours, 4 days a week, and we get paid for it. So that started in August. And that's when we actually got to experience what it's like to work in a hospital, because until that time we were just medical students. We were just coming in and leaving whenever we wanted to. But when we were AIMS assistants in medicine, we actually had to work properly. We had to do the ward runs, we had to type, we had to do consults, we had to do discharge summaries. So we kind of did experience what it's like to actually work in a hospital as an intern or a resident. And that was a really good learning experience for us, because at that point we knew, okay, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to improve on, and this is what we need to know for next year. So that was a really good learning curve, because it's not like we were transitioned directly from being a student to an intern just like that. We actually had some experience beforehand. So it was really good, and I'm really glad I joined the AIMS program. So that happened until December, and then we got our break prior to starting our internship. I couldn't mention earlier, but in the middle of 5th year, so this was around May, June, we had to apply for jobs. So because I was in New South Wales, I was applying only for New South Wales jobs, and honestly it was not a very complicated process. So I'll make a more detailed video. So that's basically about it on how I got a job and how I finished my 5th year. So before the end of the 5th year, we already knew that we had jobs in these hospitals, which was good. And we sat our OSCEs. It was more like a vibe at that point, because they didn't want us to come in to because as I said before, OSCEs there's a bunch of examiners, there's a bunch of students, so it's a bit of a crowded place. So they didn't want a lot of people to come in because of COVID. And even our exams, we actually had it online, and there was this ProctorU thing where they monitor us while we do the exam. So everything was online at the point except for our placements, all because of COVID. So even OSCEs, they kind of changed the OSCEs to a viva, which means we don't actually see a patient or anything. We are more given a case and we just describe what we do. So we'll say this is what we do, blah blah blah, instead of actually doing it on a patient, which is what an OSCE is. So vivas were fine as well, and most of us passed. And additionally, we had a different exam at the end of 5th year, which is a prescribing exam. So that's an exam that happens in UK as well, if I'm not mistaken. So it's an exam where you have to, it's basically about medications, like the medications you would give for a case, and they quiz you on that stuff. We can look at resources such as Australia Medicine's Handbook, which is AMH. We looked that up to find the answers, and we, write those down. And that was the point, that was the first time we've ever had kind of like an open book exam in my medical school, like my journey. And it was still quite hard, not gonna lie. It was very hard for me, and it was like, I'm very bad at mathematics as well, and there were some mathematical calculations to do, and I was so bad at it, but it was overall fine. We passed the year. So yeah, and then we finished the year in December. We finished our AIMS and we graduated. Our graduation ceremony actually happened the next year because of COVID. But that's kind of a summary of how my journey in Western Sydney, Australia was. So that's basically all for this video. I tried to keep it as short as possible and quick because I don't want to bore you guys with this, but so I hope this one helped as well and y'all got some information about Western Sydney, Australia. So I will be making a couple more videos in future, and I also have some collaborations maybe lined up for y'all. So we'll see. I'll let you guys know. I'll post it when I do have those stuff ready. But other than that, if you guys do have any other video ideas or suggestions, just let me know in the comments down below. And as I said before, if you did like this video, please give it a big thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for watching. Bye.